Well, thank you for coming. And may the Lord bless you and actually affirm the effort and endeavor that you took to get here. I appreciate that. I don't like driving in heavy rain on the highway. There's always the danger of kind of like water, what do they call it? Hydroplaning, yeah. And I've seen cars do that, and it's kind of scary stuff. And you really find yourself driving defensively. I find myself now assuming the worst, and then if it happens, you're ready for it, and if it doesn't, good. It's probably a better way to drive. But I want to begin with a theme here. We're talking about wisdom. We've been talking about the character of the wise in Proverbs, and I'm enjoying just dabbling a little bit here and there. It's not an in-depth series, but just it's a way of seeing how do you apply, because wisdom has to do with not just knowing a truth, second, understanding it, third, actually experiencing it, but fourth, applying it. And of those four, to know something, to understand it, like for example, let's say the book of Job. You can know the book of Job, but then you can begin to understand it after you've read it a few times. You can't get it the first time. Have you noticed this with several books of Scripture? You don't get it the first time. You get a general picture, but then it fills in. And then you understand it, but then you have to experience it. And very often it's a dangerous thing to teach the book of Job, as you can well see. But then to apply it is the key. And in that instance, I discovered that the wisdom is stop looking for answers and start trusting the one you'll never understand. You see, that's called wisdom. And that embraces then the contingencies of this uncertain world, doesn't it? Because we realize you can't control 1 hour. You can't control a day, let alone a day, a month, a year. It's out of control. But your times are in His hands. And so I had this little thing that kind of summarizes some of the themes I've seen in Proverbs, the humility becoming one of them. Because remember that the key to humility is realizing that there's nothing you brought to the table. It's realization. What do you have that you didn't already receive? Then why do you boast as if you haven't received it? There's nothing that you have or have acquired that was not also amplified by the grace of God in your life. There's no such thing as a self-made man, you see. This idea that everything is gift and grace is the concept here. And loyalty, I think we're defined by our commitments to other people. In many ways, you see, this is a covenantal book. And the covenantal concept, only the God of Scripture is a covenant maker and keeper. What does a covenant mean? What do you do when you're making a covenant with someone, as opposed to a contract? With a contract, you're protecting yourself from someone. With a covenant, you're committing yourself to another person. You see to their better good. And so God is a covenant maker and keeper. Even when we violate, He keeps it. So you are a man who shows covenant loyalty to your friends, you see, and to the people that you know. You're a person who's teachable, and part of wisdom, as I see it, is the idea of being teachable and having this sense of this grasp. There's this incredible poem by T.S. Eliot that just popped into my head. And there's the thing that I want you to see here is this look at the line on the top. Old men ought to be explorers. Think of that for a moment. Old men ought to be explorers. Here or there does not matter. We must be still and still moving. Think of that, the brilliance of that. Still and still moving means that you are still and quiet, and yet you continue to move on. It means you're a contemplative in action. You see, the stillness, you carry your intimacy with Jesus with you into the marketplace, into the public arena. But you're moving, but you're still with Him. You see the concept? You need to have that inner life. Into another intensity, for a further union, a deeper communion. And that's why made me think of that poem, because of the idea of being teachable. never suffer from the disease, the awful disease of the hardening of the categories. That's worse than hardening of the arteries. But you want to be supple and you want to be fresh. Psalm 92 says, they will still bear fruit in old age. They will be full of sap and very green. Now, it reminds me of Rodney Dangerfield. He says, I looked at my family tree and found out I was the sap. So I'm not meaning the sap in that way. But to be full of, what does it mean, the sap? It's this vitality in you, you see, that animates the vine. And there's no reason that you cannot continue to become more supple, fluid. With wisdom, you realize all the blunders and stupid things you've done. What a collection I've got. I have a massive collection of woulda, coulda, shouldas in my life, you see. How many stupid things I've done. And it reminds me of that wonderful scene when Red Redding is there at the parole board after 30 years. And he says, do you regret this? And all this? He says, I'm not going to play your game anymore. He says, but he was in danger of being institutionalized. But he said, it's not a day. Do I regret it? Sure. It's not a day goes by that I don't tell that young man, the man he was when he was 16, don't do it. But he won't hear me. Because you have to have certain wisdom that empowers you to do the right thing. Sure, after the fact, we can see the wisdom. But how do you gain wisdom to know how to appropriate and approach the circumstances of life that you cannot predict with grace and appropriateness? And that means that you develop a skill. I think mostly through the school of hard knocks, to be honest with you. Mostly through living and learning. There's no substitute for that. And we know that the greatest lessons we learn are not going to be through our successes, but through our setbacks, through our failures. That's where you're going to learn. Look at those times. Don't mourn them. Learn from them. Analyze them. Review them, you see, so that you will have a better perspective in training yourself. But it's also wise to learn and live. Not just live and learn, and that's what the Proverbs are about. So teachability, when you stop learning, you start dying. You need to continue to develop your categories. Be supple. Old men ought to be explorers. I'm not saying you're all old men, but we're all really very, very short in our earthbound span, isn't it? So at the end, we need to continue to grow. And then righteousness. And that word righteousness is the word of, I would say that's a word I'd use for summarizing the life of Christ. Because righteousness means conforming to a standard. And Paul describes it that we may be pleasing to him, you see. So you want to actually live in such a way that you are pleasing, ordering your life simply to hear the well done of the Father. But even the little nudges, that's good along the way. And there are going to be times when the Spirit of God prompts you and sometimes encourages you and sometimes rebukes you. But you've got to train yourself to hear that voice. Righteousness, godly speech, so that the idea of what do I say, what do I allow myself to say, and what do I allow myself to hear, you see. And a lot of people are using this app called Covenant Eyes. Any of you use that? Hear about it? Check it out. It's interesting because it will then filter out stuff that you, and it has a way of, it's a covenant. It's like, it goes where you go. And so you're giving this thing accountability. You can't look at stuff without having a covenant kind of context. God knows we need some help. Forgiving. A person who forgives, as you know, not to forgive, to choose not to forgive is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. The person is going to be, that you set free is not the other person, but it's you. When you choose the way of unforgiveness, you do not grasp the depth of the forgiveness and grace that you received. You don't even get it. And then also thoughtfulness, that they are thoughtful and they ask, what is it that the Spirit's guiding me to do in this moment, in this time? I didn't plan to go into that in that much depth, but the other thing that I wanted to mention was Proverbs 3:5-7, because in backing off from wisdom, I keep going back to this concept here when he tells us to trust in the Lord with all your heart. What does that mean, with all your heart? Well, the way I see that then, it means to trust him entirely. There's not a part of you, and there's going to be, otherwise you're going to be tempted to cut back. I can't trust you in this area. I can trust you in this area. You see, the areas that you know you can't control are the ones you will, but when it's an area you think you can control, it's when it's an area of your presumed expertise, you're less likely to trust him. And the more of this earthbound goods that you have, the more likely you're to trust that. You see, so you have to be aware entirely, exclusively, you see, because he goes on to say, do not lean on your own understanding. Do not do that. You don't understand a blade of grass, a drop of water. You can't understand anything in this creation. That was my big discovery in the last year. I mean, I knew it, but I didn't know it. I realized anything I looked at in the created order is beyond my comprehension. So how am I going to understand the fringe of his ways? I don't lean on my understanding as the wise thing, but in all my ways I want to acknowledge him, and he will make my paths straight. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. So to fear the Lord is to reverence him enough to take the move and the action of a holy obedience, you see, where you train yourself to be spring-loaded toward obedience before the living God. So it's entirely, exclusively, and extensively. Trust the Lord in all your ways. Acknowledge him. You see the concept? And he will make your paths straight. So if you want to walk with wisdom and prudence and discernment and understanding, if you want to be a man whose life is actually that which really invites an account, what's it about you? There's a quality of transcendence. There's a fragrance of the eternal. There's a sense of graciousness, goodness, and kindness that you can't just write off as being just a nice guy. There's something winsome about you. There's something that makes us look beyond you to Christ in you, you see. And that's exactly how it works. And so in looking at this concept then, we have this theme of wisdom. And I now want to go into what I was planning to say. So I didn't plan to say any of that, but sometimes you feel prompted to say that. So this is what I was going to go into, this part 5. But remember, there's a 7-part series here, and on the website here, let me see if I can find it for you here. Got the wrong one, I'm afraid, here. Let me just go to this one here and see which one it was. Because, yes, is this it here? The Art of Living, yes. Is that, no, that's practicing God's presence. What all I have to do is go to the library and go to Old Testament, and then I have an invitation to pursue wisdom. And there are two series, Practical Wisdom. This is part 1, and then there's another one, part 2. And there are 7 parts, so we're going to be putting them up. But what I'm giving you, of this material I'm giving you, it's being edited, but this is what I'm going to use to teach. But the wise person knows the value of speech, you see. There's a power in words. And so I want to zoom in on that area. When we're talking about character, we want to talk about how do you speak, how do you listen, how do you relate? Because really, the whole key to life is relationships. And the key to effective relationships is what? Effective communication, you see. That's why the Word of God and prayer are so critical. You got to communicate. And a key to effective communication is effective listening. Hard to do. Very few people are good listeners. Very few people. The few people who listen to people are usually having to be paid to do so. They're called shrinks or counselors, you see. It's an interesting thought. We have to pay someone to really listen to us, and even then I'm not so sure. The point is that the value of words, you see, there's a disproportionate problem of input and output. Have you noticed this? If you were to do a transcript of your own speech for a day and read it, what would that be like? It would be a great analysis, wouldn't it? Imagine if you recorded yourself for a whole day and did an analysis of your speech. and see how much time did you spend about me, but mine. And so it's incredible how that can be. The power of words. Words have the power of life and death, you see. You can speak. They do have power. And they also have the power, the tongue has the power to provide spiritual life on another person, you see. You can injure or you can sustain another person. They have the power of death, you see. So like a club and a sword and a sharp arrow is a man who bears false witness against his neighbor. These words matter. And what you say, once it's out, you can't retract it. And you just can't get rid of it. And so we have to be very careful. That's why I'd rather, if in doubt, what should I say? Don't. When in doubt, don't. I almost never regret not saying something. I've often regretted saying things. I'm sure you can figure that one out. Power to heal or to wound, powerful. Because there's one who speaks rashly, like the thrust of a sword, but the tongue of the wise brings healing. Because sarcasm, the word sarcasm comes from sarkismos, which means to cut the flesh. So it's injurious, you see. Words sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. I remember I told you about how that didn't work when I was a little kid. I still remember saying that, and the words fell out of my mouth. I said, that's not true. Words do hurt. They do injure. They can heal or wound. Words also, I'm just jumping, I'm being very selective here. Another power of speech is that you can reward yourself or trouble yourself. A man will be satisfied with good by the fruit of his words, and the deeds of a man's hand will return to him. But there are limitations to words as well. You have to understand, in all labor there is profit, but mere talk only leads to poverty. So there's the show me state, that whole idea. Talk's cheap, I want action, is the concept there. And words can't alter or change reality, as many people try to do. You're trying to change this by our own way of seeing this. And they can't compel a response. A rebuke goes deeper into one who has understanding than 100 blows to a fool. And there's sometimes you just can't compel a response in the life of another person. But then there are characteristics of words, you see, and the characteristics of wise words is of honesty. That you speak with clarity and honesty and openness, and words that love the truth, and therefore I don't like being corrected. But frankly, I need it. I just sent something to someone, and the guy criticized it. And what was my first reaction? Well, it was actually a third party. This one guy sent it to another guy, and then he shared the guy's response. What was my first response when I saw the guy wasn't entirely enamored with all that I had said? What does he know? Yeah, you see? So what attitude does a wise person take? Be always a learner. There's not a person you can't learn from. And recognize that there's a teaching moment, and the Spirit of God, to use that metaphor from C.S. Lewis, is the invisible master of ceremonies who connects you with various people, and sometimes connects you with someone you didn't expect to meet, and you can gain a word of wisdom from that. So you want to love the truth. I can't control that, though, but and the words, another character of words is that they're few and not many. Let me give you 5 ways of cutting your words down. 5 ways, okay? So I'd like you to write these down, these 5 simple ways. The first one's flattery. A wise person doesn't flatter. That'll kill a lot of speech right there. It's amazing. You start analyzing this, and it's very easy to try to, like verbal bribes. We try to actually get something out of someone else. And flattery really is deceptive speech because it has guile underneath it. A second thing that would shorten our amount of, reduce our words would be boasting. And check it out. There are subtle ways of boasting that don't appear to be as such. Some people are really good at doing this stuff. And then a third one, so that's another way of keeping, don't boast about tomorrow. You don't know what a day will bring forth. Let another praise you and not your own mouth. A stranger and not your own lips. You realize you're looking for some kind of acknowledgement, some accolade. No, play to an invisible audience of one. And don't be impressed with the creation, but with the Creator. The more you're impressed with Jesus, the less you're impressed by anything else. And that's what, again, this whole idea, you don't need to boast. You don't need to take yourself that seriously because there's one who already did take you seriously. You see the concept? You are of great worth. You have nothing to prove, nobody to impress when you grasp your true dignity and identity in Him. A third way of reducing our speech is to avoid harping and nagging. And don't tell me that guys don't do this. Because guys can be, they'll say, oh, my wife is, no, actually I've known a lot of guys who are really good and skillful at masculine harping and nagging. It's amazing. There's ways of doing this. Some people are adept and adroit. A fourth way is gossiping. Again, you might not think of it, but check it out. Have you ever shared something with someone else that maybe should have been checked out before you did that? You see? So, for example, if a person says, so-and-so said this or so-and-so did this. Well, I've told you this before, but I'm going to say it again because I need to hear it as well. I point a finger to you and three are going back to me, you see. So it's about me. It's realizing I need this. And so gossiping. When I hear something like that, what should be my response? And I've told you this before. What should it be? Have you told that person? Almost nobody asks that question, do they? They're like tender morsels. They go down and you almost feel good because you see, comparatively speaking, you're better than that, you see. I think this is why people watch crazy reality TV, so-called reality TVs, you see, to see, well, I may be bad, but I'm not like that hoarder, or whatever it might be. So you refrain from that. The words of a whisperer are like dainty morsels. They go down into the innermost part of the body. So have you told him? And then if they say no, they didn't, which is over 90% likely, what should your response be then? Why are you telling me? Now that'll make friends, won't it? But frankly, you're instructing them, and if they are willing to receive, then it's a wise lesson for us to learn, you see. So gossiping. The fifth way of cutting down our speech is arguing, you see. There's always a place for genuine disagreement. I understand that. But we're talking about someone who's really angry, and the perverse man spreads strife. A slanderer separates intimate friends. Like charcoal to hot embers and wood to fire, so is a contentious man to kindle strife. So there they are: flattery, boasting, nagging, gossiping, and arguing. Use that as a diagnostic tool to how you might be able to cut down certain speech. And I think you'll find it would pare some things down a great deal. Good words also are they're calm and not emotional, and they require skillful listening. And that to me is very critical. Instead of giving an answer before you have all the facts. And stop stepping on other people's ideas like you step on someone's toes. But don't jump to false conclusions. So you want to ponder carefully before you respond. And this is just plain wisdom that we see in the book of Proverbs. And the source of good words, of course, is the living God, as we well know. And then the other theme I wanted to pull out in our few minutes. See, I'm speeding up. You see, I'm going to get it all in. Because I plan to do these two parts here very quickly. The biblical theme of money. Let's say a word about money. I know it has almost no bearing on your life, but let's talk about it anyway. It's very theoretical, right? Wisdom is extraordinarily uneven. There are many people who have wisdom and shrewdness about many aspects of the spiritual life, but when it comes to money, they are fools. So you have to realize, how is it possible that a person can have wisdom here and folly there? We're all this way. And you need to be aware and be willing to be assess and evaluate where you are. Be willing to be corrected. So The whole idea of money, if you make a money a rival of God, it's spiritual adultery. So their secondary concerns, like these kind of details, have a way of crowding out the primary focus. And that's what Jesus was saying. You look to this, seek first his kingdom, his righteousness. Then what does he say? Your heavenly Father knows what your needs are. But you seek the first things first. Then he'll take care of you. The second things take care of themselves. But money has its limitations. There are profound limitations because it can never really satisfy your deepest appetite. It never delivers what it claims, you see. They have the illusion that it'll do so. So the real issue is then to pursue character over wealth. You see, in my view then, wisdom invites us not to look to the acquisition of earthbound goods as an end in itself, but actually to become like God, like him, walking in Christ-like character. And I think then your choices will be much, much more likely to be wise. And you don't want to pursue wealth as your primary goal because it's fleeting. Let's be honest about it. We know this. It's astonishing to me. I was talking with a guy who's very well known in the area of biblical counseling concerning money. So he's in a major organization, and we were talking about this. And he was astonished at how he could get a person to bump up the money he's giving away and trust God for it. And it was an intriguing thing, and he got the guy to go up much higher than he would ever do, but he couldn't quite get him to go where the logic went. And why? Because he was looking at that just has so much money. But he failed to grasp that the money is all God's, and he failed to grasp that this is something you can do. And he showed it, but he couldn't let go of it. You see, it was tenacious. It was sticking to him. You see. And it wouldn't let go, like the tar baby. You just couldn't get rid of the thing that begins to define you. And so even when they say, yes, I'll do this, then when it comes down to it, what happens? They back off. This particular guy had vast amounts of money, and the guy was just saying, I'm not talking about poverty here, but let's understand biblical giving is proportionate. And it is sacrificial. If your giving doesn't have an impact on your lifestyle, it's not sacrificial. So if you have $100 million, what would it take for it to be affecting your lifestyle? A great deal, a higher percentage than a person who has less than $1 million. You see where I'm going with that? The percentage should go up. The risk should go up. Few people will trust him with that because it's too very evident before them. So it's fleeting, and they fail to grasp the fleeting. And we leave everything behind. And how do we define profit? And the third reason is why money has profound dangers is because of the spiritual downside. And here's where I would turn to texts that speak about shifting your trust and confidence on the uncertainty of wealth. And so you're going to miss and turn away from the one who never changes. And so Deuteronomy 8:18, it is God who gives you the power to make wealth. Many men will acknowledge that their time is in God's hands. They'll acknowledge that their talent is given to them by God, but often they won't acknowledge if they made a lot of money that the treasure was also given to them by God. It's interesting. No, I did that. I earned that. Nonsense. He gave you the life breath, the capacities, and all that. It's all from him. And the 1 Timothy 6 text is the most essential one. Instruct those who are rich in this present world not to be conceited or to fix their hope on the uncertainty of riches. So one of the things that they're going to be doing, one of the downsides of a great deal of wealth is that the more you have, the more you're going to be tempted to be proud, be conceited. Number two, the more you have, the more you're going to make that the basis for your security and not the living God, you see. And then number three, so it'll be harder for you to live by faith, you see, that concept. because you'll not be taking risks in that concept. So just to tie those threads together then, I just wanted to see then that the more we have, the harder it is to live by faith. Let's just be honest about it, you see. So if God bumps that up, he's expecting something. So so there are various principles along this line, but I wanted to just stop here and ask you these three questions here. What are the strengths and weaknesses of words? If you took any notes, you will have pulled out a couple things, and maybe the collective wisdom of your table can discuss that. The second, which of the 5 ways to limit our words do you need to work on? So maybe you can pare down your speech by getting rid of one of those 5. And the third one, what are the limitations of wealth? I was just summarizing with my quote table, which are the people on the Zoom call. I was summarizing these 5 points because one particular question is how do you deal with arguing and how do I approach that and so forth. And wanted to see what insights, what gems, what pearls that you've come up with at your yes.
I'd like to just mention one thing. You had indicated about giving as well.
Yes.
And from our platform here at First Redeemer, and every church I've ever been at, now it's time to give as part of the blessing. I think we need to get the word giving out of our vocabulary. It's returning.
Returning is a good word, yeah.
Whatever money he's made, whatever gifts and talents he gave it.
Yeah, it's not a bad way to put it. You're really returning the blessing, yeah. And then a lot of wisdom's required, not just how much, and only, you notice it never tells you, it just gives you principles. We're not under the tithe anymore, you see, because this tithe, bring the whole tithe to the storehouse. That was the temple, not the church. So it's actually more radical in the New Testament than tithing. Because if you want to play that game, by the way, it was 23.5%. Because there were 2 annual tithes and 1 triannual tithe. So it's interesting, nobody plays that game. You want to play that game, do it that way. But the New Testament's far more radical because it says it's proportionate. And the reality in the world is actually, in practice, the more a person has, the less proportion they give. Because they idiotically look at the total amount rather than the relative amount. I can't believe that people could do that, but they do. So the idea then is, how do you then view this? Well, it's sacrificial, it's proportionate. So if anything, the more you have, the more proportion one would give. It makes total sense, but it's precisely the opposite. And a cheerful giver is one who says, this is a privilege, an opportunity that I'm granted. And I see this then, that he has given me the privilege of being able to then be a blessing to others. It's an astonishment. So you want to be cheerful about that. You see, yes?
Bob and I were talking, and I've often thought about every time you pass one of those lottery billboards, $54 million,
yeah.
this thought flashes in your mind, gosh, if I could win that.
Yeah, if I could win
I would
that.
give half of it to the church. And Bob said, well, why don't you just take half of what you got right now? Why wait to the lottery?
Why wait for the world? It's amazing what people suppose that in most cases, it's not a blessing for them. Most admit. There used to be an old TV show I still remember called The Millionaire. And John Beresford Tipton and Michael Anthony, remember, was the guy who there was always 2 rules though. You couldn't reveal the source and also the amount, you see. So it's going to be a cashier's check, tax-free. So it means then that the taxes were prepaid. So it's a lot more than $1 million. What effect did it have? And as you can probably guess, if you never saw the show, it's predictable. It was not generally good. There are a few instances, but as a whole, my father was one who played the lottery, and every week he put money into it. And I said, Dad, if you would only take the money you're investing in that and put it in any kind of a reasonable account, you see, anything, just don't put it there, you see, just a mutual fund or anything, you'd be doing better. But he said, yeah, but somebody's got to win. Yeah, I said, but it won't be you. You see, because your chances are you're better off, more likely to be hit by lightning than this. But then I said, after a while, so he always had this idea, I couldn't persuade him, but I finally asked him, what would you do if it did come, if you did get it? The guy had no clue. It wasn't really thought out. Just the supposition, if I have this, then I'll be happy. Nonsense. Because if you're not content with what you have, you will not be content with what you want. Contentment's a choice. It's an attitude. Gratitude is a choice, an attitude. You and I are called to come to life out of a sufficiency modality, not a deficiency modality. You and I are called to see you and I have been greatly and vastly blessed. And so instead of seeing what you don't have, the wise person marvels at what one does have. And you know human nature. Nothing ages more quickly than gratitude. You do something for someone, and guess what happens? With the passing of time, grace degenerates into entitlement. What have you done for me lately? It's astonishing how great gratitude has a short half-life. It ages quickly. And so we need to be amazed that we have this privilege. It's a shift, isn't it, in your thinking, in your perspective, that this is a privilege to be able to serve and help other people in that regard. Yeah. So it's a return. What other thoughts? Yes.
I thought it was interesting at our table that the stories of wisdom that came up were actually about people that aren't very bright in our past, but they were really good leaders by example.
Yes.
Like one person was actually illiterate, but or the other was a really bad student, but great leaders by example.
It's an intriguing thing then that we can learn. That's why I said before, you don't look at people as the world does, the socioeconomic and all the various external things, but rather there's a quality that you can learn, as I say, from any person. And sometimes people who don't have those advantages may have a corresponding perception or wisdom. Sometimes you'll see this as well, generational wisdom. There was a question over here somewhere that I saw before. Maybe I saw it. Yes.
I had a friend of mine who I respect very much, I guess he'd be my Barnabas, said, give joyfully, give quickly. Then you know that really you capture the sense of what God wants you to do, to give. Joyfully and quickly. You just already know, just right up the check.
Yes. I'll tell you the hardest thing for people, especially people who have a certain amount of this world's goods that begins to become substantive enough that it becomes, if they're not careful, a part of their identity, a terrible blunder. But the reality is that they find it hard to let loose of these things, and it begins to hold them tenaciously. The longer you hold something, the harder you hold it, what happens? It begins to define you by its grip. And you think you're holding on to it? It's holding on to you. So you can't get rid of that. So it's good for us to gain wisdom and prudence and discernment and understanding and seek to learn from everyone we know, to have a perspective, a point of view that honors God in the details of life, and to approach life out of the overflow and out of the amazement that you have been privileged more than other people. You realize, I've told you this multiple times, you and I live better than kings did 100 years ago. You have more luxuries, more conveniences, more options than anyone could even have imagined, you see. And yet it's never enough. So be a person, choose the way of gratitude and of contentment.